So thank you for having me. So my name is Lucy. I'm going to present this project on reaching across the aisle, kind of movement building in a world with affective polarization. And this is joint with Hannah Rubeck. Okay, so this project starts from the idea that in democracies like the US, long-term policy change on issues like climate requires building kind of durable legislative coalitions. And in the US, making these coalitions bipartisan might be particularly important, though hard to achieve, because very little policymaking happens in the US without at least some degree of bipartisan support. So first of all, because control of the government is typically split, so a single party controlled the presidency, the Senate, and the House for only 16 of the last 52 years, though now we are adding to that. And even when a single party has total control, legislation rarely passes without at least some minority party votes. And we might think that bipartisan citizen movements might be one kind of key tool in building these coalitions in Congress. So first of all, there's evidence that legislators respond to constituent lobbying and that they particularly respond to members of their own voter base. So that bipartisan citizen movements might be kind of differentially effective in building these coalitions in Congress. And in theory, this is possible on issues like climate in the US. So obviously climate skews very heavily left, as we've just seen, but a third of Republicans say that they think Congress should be doing more to address climate change, and in theory could be mobilized. Okay, and so there's also recent work in political science and economics showing that political and social action spreads through social networks. So citizens themselves might shape the composition of grassroots movements so that the members of this kind of mainstream liberal climate coalition might actually play a role in broadening that coalition across party lines. But even if citizens kind of recognize that a bipartisan movement might be more effective, we know that there is really high and increasing affective polarization, so dislike of those across the political aisle, that could kind of hold back movement building across the aisle. So this is graphing the kind of workhorse measure of affective polarization, which is warmth towards your own party minus warmth towards the opposite party in the US. And obviously it is increasing very sharply over time and is at kind of record high levels. And so we might worry that that could reduce people's willingness to cooperate across party lines. Okay, so the broad question for this project is whether affective polarization kind of holds back efforts to build a bipartisan coalition on climate change in the US. And so we look at this in a series of online experiments with about 21,000 people where we sequentially kind of focus in on three questions. So first, do Democrats try to recruit others for citizen climate advocacy? So are they kind of motivated to expand the political movement overall? Second, if so, do they differentially try to build a more bipartisan citizen coalition or to recruit others like themselves? And then third, we'll try to decompose the beliefs and the preferences, like affective polarization, that would underlie efforts to reach out along versus across party lines. So I'll try to get through all of this and we'll see. Yeah, Mike?
Belief, you mean, I think I'll never persuade them, and
yes, so we're going to distinguish between kind of strategic beliefs, like how effective am I at mobilizing them? How effective are they as advocates? From I just have a preference for cooperating with different kinds of people. Okay, so the basic setup is that we construct this online network with about 21,000 people where we give Democrats opportunities to try to recruit Americans across the political spectrum to email Congress about climate change. So we're going to recruit two waves of people, none of whom know each other. So first, a wave one of Democratic influencers, we'll call them, and then a wave two of targets or influencees, some of whom are Republicans, some of whom are Democrats, but all of whom believe that climate change is human caused. And across a couple of different experimental designs, we first give the wave one Democrats opportunities to themselves email Congress about climate change. And so this is going to happen via a form that we embed in an online survey where all of this is taking place. So this is what the form looks like. We license it from a software company that licenses forms like this to NGOs. So this is going to look like basically exactly what it would look like if you went to an NGO's website and tried to contact Congress. So these are real emails that are getting sent to people's House reps and senators. People spend on average about 8 minutes writing an email, and we observe every email that gets sent here.
Public or traceable is deduction?
Sorry, say that again?
How public or traceable?
This is going to be totally private. So in general, this will be totally private. Like this form of action is not normally seen. I will show you that one of our experimental interventions is going to be making this public to other people, giving people opportunities to mobilize others by telling them, I did this thing, why don't you join me? And showing that that has a very large effect on action. But generally, this is a private form of political action.
To have a sense, what do people expectations are about emailing Congress? Because I guess my priority is they get so many emails that it's not really action. They don't get replies. So I wonder, it's like what?
Yeah, so I guess I would say in our sample where we recruit these people online, they know it's a survey about climate change. They're selected to kind of care about climate change. They're relatively politically active. In our control group, about 30% of them actually like send an email. So this is, we should probably have asked them, how effective do you actually think this will be in changing policy? We don't. So they do it, but it may be that they do it primarily for kind of, instrument or affective warm glow reasons. Okay. So we give them this chance to take action, and then we're going to randomly connect them with future Wave 2 participants to whom they can send these invitations to join in emailing Congress. So this is kind of what they look like. They show the demographics of the person who is inviting this Wave 2 respondent. They say, I emailed Congress to push for climate action. Please consider joining me. Okay. So basically, we're going to mostly focus on the action of these Wave 1 influencers to run a series of experiments to understand whether and how they try to expand this grassroots movement. So we do this in 3 experiments. First, in the Wave 1 action experiment, we ask our first question, which is just overall, do these Democrats try to recruit other people for this form of action? In our second experiment, we ask, if so, do they differentially try to recruit co- or counterpartisans who share this basic belief that climate change is at least real? And then third, we'll run a series of mechanism experiments to try to decompose why they're differentially reaching out along or across party lines.
So none of this is going to be about the actual policy that they're kind of advocating for, asking Congress for. So there could be a big element of just disagreement.
Yes.
The parties, it's just like what to do. We agree that there's a problem.
So that could be one mechanism. That could be, you don't want a Republican to email because you don't like the policy that they're going to push for. What I'll show is that actually we find that Democrats have no differential preference for having a Republican or a Democrat email Congress about climate when we shut down this beliefs about just how effective am I at mobilizing these different kinds of people. So we'll come back to this, but if it were driven by, I just don't like what they're going to say, we would expect to find a gap when we shut down the mechanism, and we don't.
Are they probably emailing different people?
They are. So they're going to be emailing their own House reps and senators, but everything's going to be conditional on the state where they live. And so.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I guess what I really meant was kind of thinking ahead and thinking where this is like, because your motivation was about mobilizing Congress and getting them to do something. But if the fundamental issue is deciding what to do, then this is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. So this is going to be more like, contacting Congress to say, I care about climate change. I want you to do something. This is not going to be looking at, say there's some particular policy. It's possible that this would work differently, and I'm not going to be able to speak exactly to that. Yeah. Okay. So then we recruit Wave 2. We randomly and truthfully actually pass on these invitations so we can test how effective are they actually in mobilizing Democrats and Republicans. Okay. So our first experiment, the Wave 1 action experiment, we find that yes, Democrats do try to recruit people overall to join in action. So they try to spread this movement. Okay, so they start by making this basic demographic profile. This is going to be like how people communicate with others, is just by sort of these quasi-anonymous profiles. We show them the upcoming opportunity to email Congress. Before they decide whether to actually email Congress or not, we randomize them to a series of treatments to try to understand whether they actively try to recruit other people. So the basic idea is that we're going to test whether the sample values mobilizing others by testing whether they are more likely to email Congress themselves when doing so can inspire other people to join them, when they can have kind of a multiplier effect in terms of getting other people involved. So first, you can think of us as randomizing people to two groups. So first to a pure control group, where they just decide kind of by themselves whether to email Congress or not. We randomize others to this invitation group, where we say, if you email Congress, we will pass on these invitations from you to up to 10 future people, inviting them to join you in emailing Congress. Now, so comparing email rates between these two arms gives us kind of the policy relevant effect of just what happens when you give people opportunities to invite others, but it's not actually going to separate out what we would call influence motives, whether they actually value mobilizing other people, because people might value passing on these invitations just because they have image benefits from telling other people that they emailed Congress. So in order to separate out these influence motives from just image benefits, we randomize others to the tell after arm, where we tell them, if you email Congress, we will tell up to 10 future participants that you did so, but only after they make their own email choice. So the key idea is that the only difference between the invitation and the tell after groups is that invitation participants' choices to email Congress themselves can affect whether other people do the same. So just to recap, what are we picking up in comparisons of email rates? So a difference between the control group versus the tell after group could come from social or self-image benefits of others knowing you emailed Congress, or any attempts to affect their action outside of the experiment itself. Whereas differences in email rates between these groups are just going to reflect efforts to kind of inspire other people to email Congress during the survey itself. Okay. So what do we find? So this is the share of participants who email Congress in these different arms. So first, there are big effects from the invitation treatment. So participants are about 16% percentage points, about 52% more likely to email Congress in the invitation group. When we bring in the tell after treatment, we see that that alone has quite large effects. And again, those could be image effects, or people say in their qualitative responses a lot about trying to affect people outside of the survey, so it could also be that. But those in the invitation group are an additional 3 percentage points, about 9% of the pure control mean, more likely to email Congress. So they're internalizing their externalities on others' political action and are trying to mobilize others. Okay.
So you can control, is there a sense that this nonetheless is like an effort to build a grassroots movement, not through networking? I just wonder that, like, as soon as you tell people we're telling people, then it frames it as we're creating a movement versus I'm just working with.
Well, so the control group, they don't hear anything about telling other people.
I guess I'm trying to wonder if it's like the reason that I'm motivated is because I know that by doing so you're going to tell other people, or when you've done it this way, you framed it to me as like this is a broad effort that's a movement.
Interesting. Yeah. So that I guess that I would expect to operate probably in the same way in the tell after group. So that's going to be probably constant between these, but that could be part of this large effect. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you manipulate the share of Republicans in the invitees? Is that something
yes.
you're going to do?
So we do have that variation where we randomize whether the people you could tell are Republicans or Democrats. We do find a gap there, but it's the next experiment I'll talk about is where we're really powered to look at who they're trying to invite. So that's where I'll talk about that, but we find the same gaps here. Okay. So yes, in this next experiment, we try to look at who Democrats try to engage, and we find that they are much more likely to try to recruit other Democrats than Republicans, even when they know that they all believe climate change is human caused. So we look at this in what we call the willingness to pay experiment, which we embed in the peer control group of the previous experiment. So again, about 31% of those people email Congress. We invite all of those people to take an additional 15-minute survey section. And the idea here is that among these kind of inframarginal activists, so those who email Congress when they don't have an opportunity to mobilize others, we ask them to make a series of binary choices between inviting particular other people, varying in politics as well as other demographic traits, to join in emailing Congress, versus having us make carbon offset donations kind of on their behalf. And so this will give us power, the series of binary choices, to look at who Democrats are trying to recruit for action.
Isn't the problem that the Democrats, even though everybody believes in climate change, the Democrats may feel like the Republicans don't want to do anything about it?
So what I'll come back to, hopefully with time at the end, is that we find that what's really driving this is the belief that Democrats or that Republicans will react badly to them as Democrats. And they think that if they could hide that they were Democrats, they'd actually be as effective in mobilizing other Democrats and Republicans. So it doesn't seem to be that they just think they can't be moved, but that they can't be moved by them. So, okay. So we show each participant 20 real people who we recruited previously before running the previous experiment, and who will be coming back for a second survey during which they will have a chance to email Congress about climate change. And we tell each participant, you will be randomly paired with one of these 20 people. When they come back, they will see something about you. And for each of these possible matches, they make a costly choice for whether to tell that person that they emailed Congress about climate change when they took our survey. So in particular, they're choosing between two options. So first, to just show their basic demographic profile to this person and then have us donate some amount between $3 and $6 to carbon offsets, or to tell them to pass on this invitation showing that they emailed Congress and inviting them to join. So the key thing is that they're going to be trading off between carbon offset donation and telling someone that they emailed Congress. We are going to, like in the previous experiment, the same kind of logic. We're going to identify attempts to mobilize others by randomizing whether each of these possible matches would see your profile before or after making their own choice to email Congress themselves. And we motivate this to people just by saying, people are coming back, we're bringing them back for different kinds of surveys. Based on the kind of survey that they're taking, some of them would see your choice, see your profile before they choose whether to email Congress, some would see it after. And so then we will test how much more often do participants choose to show that they emailed Congress, kind of pay in offsets to tell someone that they emailed Congress, when their target would see this profile before versus after their own choice, and thus whether it can affect their own choice to email Congress. And because participants are making 20 repeated choices for particular individual targets, we can test whether they differentially try to mobilize others with certain traits. Okay. So what do they see about their possible matches? So these are real people who vary in their politics, gender, where they live, all kinds of things. And so they'll see a profile like this with their first name and their traits. And like I said, it's going to be randomized whether each of these people would see your profile about yourself before or after their own email choice. That shows up in this trait called action status, which either says already decided or hasn't been asked yet. Okay, so the y-axis in this figure is the share of choices in which participants chose to show an I emailed profile over the carbon offsets, split by whether the possible match would see this before or after their own email choice. So here, like in the Wave 1 action experiment, we find evidence that people just try to mobilize others, that they are 48 percentage points more likely to show their match that they emailed Congress themselves when it can affect that person's action, when they see it before their own choice. But we find that they are much less likely to try to recruit Republicans. So now I'm splitting both by whether the match would see it before or after their choice, and by whether the match is a Republican or a Democrat. So this is saying that 21% of the time when your match is a Republican who would see your profile after their choice, you choose to tell them you emailed Congress over offsets. Whether the match is a Republican or a Democrat, they're much more likely to tell them that they emailed Congress when they would see it before their own choice. But this differential, this before effect, is about 11.5 percentage points larger when their match is a Democrat rather than a Republican. So they are 27% more likely to try to mobilize other Democrats than Republicans. And bearing in mind that all of these profiles about their matches at least say that they think climate change is human caused. So we're shutting down that margin of belief. And we can look at how this gap compares to kind of recruitment gaps by all the other traits that are shown in these profiles. And so this partisan gap is at the top here. We find that is much, much larger than the gaps by any of these other traits like gender, age groups, educational attainment, or the politics of the state in which you live. So the politics of, the representatives who would be getting the emails is much smaller than the party of the advocate themselves. Yep.
And just to point, I know it was your prior, but I still think the 63% is a large number, right? So it's not completely pessimistic.
Yes, it's true. It's true. Yeah. So you could take this optimistically that people are trying to reach out. They're just doing it much less. And we want to understand why.
Yeah. One caveat to that is that it's a selected sample of Republicans, right? As you keep on reminding Republicans who think that climate change has anthropogenic causes, right?
Yeah. That's true. So one thing we thought was possible is like, as they see the set of 20 people, they see, oh, wow, 10 Republicans believe climate change is human caused. I'm so shocked. We don't find that this gap, is shrinking over time. That was one that they're actually sort of changing their beliefs about Republicans overall. That doesn't seem to be happening, but yeah.
But and they know that the Republicans in the sample have declared it's human.
Yes, they do. Yeah, so they yes.
Then I had, because that they might have overlooked that information. So
well, so we have actually a variation of this in which we don't include that in the profiles, and this gap is like twice as big.
very
Interesting.
yeah.
But it's sorry to jump on that, but this is not about affective polarization. It's about also how the views align.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I think that still leaves it up for debate in the sense that you may have very different emotional feelings about Republicans who believe in climate or don't, as well as differential strategic beliefs. So.
Is there ambiguity at any point in the survey about the possibility to actually interact with the person? Because they don't actually interact.
No, they're only interacting via these programs.
And you guys are very clear in this.
Yes.
So that channel is shut off.
Yes.
So to some extent, it could be an extra barrier in reality.
Yes, so I think that this is gonna be, I think, an underestimate of what happens in real world situations where there's more scope for direct interaction and where affective polarization plays a larger role.
Do you ask people whether they regularly talk about these kind of issues with their networks and the likes? Because it strikes me that the story could be exactly the opposite of what you just told, because online I get this nice distance with anonymity, and so it's fine, I'm happy to try and affect someone. In person I stand a greater risk, because what if you then don't agree with me and I got it entirely wrong?
Yes, so I think that's consistent with what the story we were just telling, that I think this would be probably a smaller recruitment gap than what we'd see in real world settings because of, but.
Yeah, it could go either way, but do you I appreciate in a survey they might be lying, but did you ask?
Well, so we do ask, so we don't ask these people in particular, but we ran kind of a qualitative motivating survey first, just about who in your network have you reached out to in the past. We find people say that they do try to recruit other people. They say that they have historically been much more likely to recruit other liberals. But I think our starting point from that was that they also say that they know many other liberals. So it could have just been a homophily story, but here, they have equal access to people along and across party lines and are still differentially.
It's a bit hard to know what's big and what's not, because we don't have a benchmark. So
Mhm.
I'm thinking that social movements historically, they were, organized around undecided issues that weren't on the political agenda. And, this was the root for putting them there. Sierra Club was created in 1902 or whatever it was. And that was before it was a polarized issue.
Yeah.
So if you took a new issue
Mhm.
and,
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
looked at people's willingness to engage with others, then we would get some perspective.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting to test. Okay. Okay. So the last part of the project is trying to understand why this gap exists. And we find that, at least in this setting, that it seems to be anticipated affective polarization, not Democrats' own kind of partisan antipathy that is holding back cross-party outreach here. So first, I just want to kind of set out a framework for how to think about this. So if we think about the value of trying to get somebody to pass on an invitation to try to get them to email Congress, first, just think that you're totally strategic. What would be the value of doing that? It would be the product of two terms. So this delta P email, how much more likely are they to email Congress because I passed on this invitation, multiplied by how much I value the impact I expect their email to have on climate policy. But we might think that there are also kind of affective or warm glow returns to reaching out to others like this. So we might think that the value of getting them to email Congress, what gets scaled here by delta P, might be both how much I value the impact I expect them to have and just some preference for cooperating with them or having them in the movement. And there might also be kind of affective or warm glow returns to seeing myself or being seen by others as trying to spread climate action. And so the partisan gaps in these attempts to influence others could be strategic, arising because you expect to be more or less effective in mobilizing different kinds of people, or you expect them to be differentially effective as advocates, or preference-based. And we think of these kind of preference-based gaps as arising from affective polarization. Okay, so we run a series of smaller experiments to try to decompose some of these things. So first, we just measure their influence beliefs, these delta P email. How much more likely are you to email Congress because I asked you to? So we randomized about 200 people to a belief sample where we measure their incentivized beliefs for the number of participants out of 100 in different demographic groups who would email Congress if they did or did not see an invitation from somebody first. So I'm plotting here the average participants' average estimates for the effects of effects of invitations on email rates. And so they expect that an invitation to a Democrat would make them 6 percentage points more likely to email Congress, while having about half as much impact on whether Republicans email Congress. So we actually recruit wave 2 and we randomly and truthfully pass on these invitations so we can measure their true effects. So I'm plotting those on the right here. And so Democrats' beliefs are remarkably close to the truth. So we can't reject that they're correct on average. So we see that Democrats correctly expect to have about twice as much impact on whether other Democrats email Congress than on Republicans. In the next mechanism experiment, we show we can't reject that these kind of differential influence beliefs kind of fully explain Democrats' tendency to differentially reach out along party lines. And the way that we do this is in what we call the certainty experiment, where we show that there's no evidence that Democrats prefer emails from other Democrats versus Republicans when they can be obtained kind of with certainty, when we shut down this mechanism of differential influence. And I'll tell you more about how we do that. So basically, we find no evidence in this next experiment that Democrats' own distaste for engaging Republicans is holding back cross-party outreach. Okay, so if you recall, like I said, we're going to think about how much Democrats value emails from different kinds of people as kind of the sum of how much they value the impact they expect that email to have and any just returns from cooperating with that kind of person. So we're going to test for differences in their overall valuation of emails from different kinds of people and these different components. So we randomized about 1,000 Democrats to this certainty experiment, where we show them 10 to 14 profiles for different demographic groups. And for each of these groups, we ask them to choose between having us recruit somebody from that group to email Congress with certainty versus having us donate money to carbon offsets. And when I say with certainty, what that means is we tell them we have these huge rosters of people that we've previously surveyed. We have people from all of these different demographic groups. If you choose this option, we commit to getting somebody in this group to email Congress through our form. And then we'll implement one of these choices for a subset of people. So here I'm graphing the coefficients from regression where the outcome is a binary variable for whether they chose the email over the offsets, regressed on the traits of these different demographic groups. And so the top here, it would be the partisan gap, if there were one. And so basically we find when we shut down this mechanism of just inviting them and having differential likelihood of success, that there's no longer any partisan gap in whose emails they try to recruit. And in fact, the only thing that matters is the politics of the state where the email would go. So the omitted category here is red states. So they are much less likely to try to recruit emails about climate change in blue states relative to red states, and even more likely to try to recruit emails in kind of purple battleground states. So when we shut down this mechanism of this delta P influence, they seem to be choosing entirely based on this heuristic and no longer choosing at all based on the party of the advocate themselves. Okay, so we can't reject that they value emails obtained with certainty equally for Democrats and Republicans. In theory, this could reflect kind of offsetting things about your beliefs about how effective an email from this person is and how much I just like having an email from this person. So we try to measure their beliefs about how impactful emails would be from different kinds of people by just asking them to rate how effective this email would be on kind of a Likert scale style measure from one randomly chosen group. And we can't reject that they think they'd be equally effective on average. So we don't find any evidence that this is coming from two offsetting gaps. So we don't find any evidence that they think they'd be differentially effective or that they have just differential preferences for cooperating with different kinds of people. Okay. So taking stock so far, so this all suggests that Democrats strategically target co-partisans because they correctly expect cross-party outreach to be less effective. We don't find any evidence that they just have a distaste for engaging Republicans that's holding back cross-party outreach. But in this last experiment, we find that cross-party outreach still seems to be held back by this broader context of really strong partisan mistrust and affective polarization via second order kind of anticipated affective polarization. The Democrats expect cross-party outreach to be less effective because they think Republicans dislike them and will react badly to them as Democrats. So we see this in a second round of the willingness to pay experiment, where we give some Democrats the ability to hide their own political leanings from targets. So we elicit their beliefs about how effective these invitations would be if they simply deleted this field, saying that they're a Democrat. And so at the left here, I'm plotting their beliefs for how the impact of these invitations that show their politics. So where here, the sample expects that invitations showing that they're a Democrat would make other Democrats 13 percentage points more likely to email Congress, while making Republicans only 3 percentage points more likely to email. Whereas if they hid their politics, they think that would make invitations to Republicans about 4 times as effective and actually close the gap in their ability to influence other Democrats versus Republicans. So that it doesn't seem to be that they just think these people can't be moved, but just that they, as Democrats, cannot successfully mobilize them. So I think I talked a bit fast and finished earlier than I expected. Yeah, okay. So just to conclude, so in the US, long-term policy change on climate and other issues requires kind of building bipartisan coalitions in Congress. And we might think that bipartisan citizen pressure is one way to facilitate that, but suggests that unified bipartisan movements at the grassroots level might be unlikely to organically form. So that even when we are directly connecting Democrats with potential allies across the political aisle, that anticipated affective polarization is holding back cross-party cooperation. And like we were talking about, I think we would expect overall these partisan outreach gaps to be even starker in more real-world settings, where segregated social networks play a role, where there's more scope for direct interaction, where your own affective polarization may play a larger role, as well as your kind of anticipated affective polarization. And so we think that mobilizing bipartisan citizen advocacy on climate, as well as likely other issues, might require kind of one of two approaches. So either kind of parallel liberal and conservative grassroots movements of kind of like mobilizing like at the grassroots level, which I'd say is close to what we see in the world today. To the extent that there is a conservative climate movement, it is explicitly conservative and focused on kind of conservatives getting other conservatives involved. Likewise, like the Sierra Club today, very clearly is focusing on mobilizing liberals on a kind of a broader platform of issues rather than just climate, or to try to facilitate grassroots cooperation in ways that directly target these second order polarization beliefs. So that's it.
Another approach be to mobilize independents, because they are swing voters, and that may be what is needed.
So yeah, right. So I would just make one clarification that in these, well, okay. Yeah, in these profiles, what they'll actually see is like leans Democrat, leans Republican. So actually the sample of wave 2 includes independents. It's not clear, I guess, if people, what people interpret when they see that, if they're probably not thinking of them as independent. So yeah, that's possible. We haven't run a variation where we say these are independents.
Are you saying that places like EDF or for the future, just like Republican and Democratic, we have donations?
So I would distinguish maybe between the, like EDF is less of a grassroots organization. Like I think the more kind of think tanky groups tend to be less partisan, but the grassroots groups like the Sunrise Movement, the Sierra Club, or they tend to be quite explicitly liberal, I would say, or explicitly conservative in a way that EDF, other Clean Air Task Force are less so.
Are there, but what are the regiments? I'm from
Yeah.
Wisconsin, I can think about like hunting and fishing groups.
Yeah.
And stuff
So
like that. Is that how you think of it?
there is a group, a relatively new group of kind of young Republicans called the American Conservation Coalition. And so that their name is indicative of their approach, which is to lead with, words like conservation, talking about hunting, things like that, and then kind of in the fine print that they are really focused on climate policy. But they are like explicitly trying to recruit Republicans, mostly around conservation stuff. Yeah.